Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. After reported outrage from Red Bull over the rear wing that McLaren deployed at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it's been officially declared illegal, it seems today, by the FIA, and McLaren themselves agreeing they will no longer use that design of the mini-DRS over the upcoming rounds. Red Bull have won this battle, but they want to go even further and get the front wing declared illegal as well. But arguably, Red Bull have far bigger problems on their hands. Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez massively struggling today in the first day of Singapore practice, and Red Bull seemingly have no answers for where their pace has gone this weekend. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. I greatly appreciate it. We smashed through 60k subs the other day, so I'm not sure I thank you guys for that yet. Maybe I did already. But anyway, thanks again, and very much appreciate all the support you guys have given this channel over the last several months. And let's keep on cracking, baby, because this was FP1. Leclerc, Norris, Sainz, Verstappen at the time, Tsunoda. These will be familiar names as we go throughout the video. There was a few pieces of drama. Alonso wasn't having the best time. He, well, pressed his pit button, maybe by accident, maybe not. He was spamming buttons basically to try and make the car turn into the corner, and he was definitely struggling with it. Also, Yuki Tsunoda, he ran into Lance Stroll. Not the biggest fan of Stroll, not gonna lie. Yuki, and another good example here, but at the end of the session, it was a Leclerc, Norris, Sainz top three. That's how it ended, and these were the overall times of 1:31.7. Not ever at the start of the day the most representative. Of course, they've got the new DRS zone there as well on the rundown towards the end of the lap in Sector 3, but this is a pretty familiar trend of the day. Obviously worthy of note that Albon and the Williams did a pretty good lap, and the RB, obviously Ricciardo might be out of the car. Ricciardo actually did another interview today, or certainly yesterday, sometime in the last 24 hours anyway, where Ricciardo basically said, yeah, the contracts are written in such a way that the decision needs to be made after Singapore. And actually, he kind of implied that, you know, he might be gone, basically, from the teams. That's the rumour, isn't it? That Liam Lawson's contract stipulates that he has to, you know, drive a few more races. And that means that if it's going to be anywhere, it's going to be now, and it's going to be for Ricciardo at RB. Whether Ricciardo then nicely steps into the Red Bull seat of Perez, that seems, you know, less than 50% likelihood that's going to happen, right? So, look, we'll see how that drama goes over the coming days. But, you know, Perez is only down in P14 after the first session. The Red Bull's one-lap pace was not really there. And, of course, it is a question this weekend for Perez. How does he go? Because we know that Baku's his best track. He's done well historically as well at Singapore, as, you know, Monza's been a bit better than his average tracks. But over the next few rounds, we're going back to some more traditional circuits, the likes of, you know, the Austin Grand Prix, the Circuit of the Americas. Obviously, Interlagos is coming up as well. This will be quite a test for Perez, because he also had a stinker here last year, right, in 2023, despite winning it in 2022. So, is he going to step up? Is he going to be on the same level of Max? And if he's not, then you can make an argument that Ricciardo should get that seat regardless. But Red Bull have been struggling. Helmut Marko said this: small adaptations are possible in Singapore. We have to bring the car and the tyre setup into a small performance window. If we can do that, we'll be back in the running. He says, I'm very confident for Austin, but we just have to get through Singapore. And honestly, his comment in terms of his positivity has got even worse as of today's FP outings. But let's dive into the drama, because back in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it was really first noticed then that McLaren were using this rear wing design, which effectively flexed into a mini DRS position, giving extra straight line speed, which, as we talked about over the last few days, is not in the spirit of the regulations, but it is nonetheless legal based on the static tests that they do. But apparently it kind of wasn't legal. So let's talk into this, because it's classic Formula 1, especially when it comes down to flexibility and whether things are fair or whether they're not fair or whether they ride the line. So Perez yesterday said it's an illegal car. Then Red Bull spoke to Toby Gruner and said that, no, you misquoted him. He didn't say illegal, he said legal. So, but if he said legal, because this is what Toby says, he's like, Red Bull have now said that I misquoted him, and they've said that he said that it's out of the regs and is a legal car, not illegal. His accent that could be heard as illegal. But the way that Toby says this is like, he clearly doesn't believe what Red Bull are saying. He's like, hope you get the chance to see it yourself. And it also doesn't make any sense that Perez would have said legal, because the next sentence was, but it seems like it's allowed. So you wouldn't say it's a legal car, but it seems like it's allowed, don't make any sense. He must have said it's an illegal car. And the funny thing is that Red Bull were like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't, have said it's illegal publicly, and then today gets basically declared illegal, doesn't it? So then Toby comes out with his article today on AMUS that Red Bull put in a complaint with the FIA, and this is classic Formula 1, but also it's classic Red Bull in many respects. I mean, they've obviously fallen off over the last, few months, so if there's something that a rival is doing that may or may not be illegal, then, why not put in a complaint? That's what they've done, and McLaren now has to modify that low downforce rear wing. This is what was described in the article, but this was the initial quote anyway. The decision followed long debates with Red Bull. Ferrari stayed in the background during the discussions, but shared Red Bull's opinion regarding, and understandably so, the McLaren rear wing. Red Bull was outraged after videos appeared on the internet in which it is clearly visible how the flap bends when DRS is not activated. If you guys haven't seen this yet, which would surprise me, but if you haven't, this is the rear wing angle at the start of the straight, and this is it kind of towards the straight. You guys can see here clearly the flaps are lifting up on the outside of the rear wing, and look, it's impressive engineering because it doesn't break the test. They pass the test technically, but obviously on some level it doesn't really seem fair, and Red Bull said that they reckon that this trick was worth 1 to 2/10 of a second. Now the interesting thing is about them getting rid of this and basically declaring it illegal on some level. Now it always goes both ways, because it's not like they've added a technical directive that says, hey, this is illegal. What they've agreed with McLaren is that they're no longer going to do it, right? McLaren have said, all right, you got us, we'll take it off the car. So, they're not getting into some drama where, it's an illegal car and therefore last weekend's race was won with an illegal car, which kind of is true on some parts, but that's not really how this works in Formula 1. They get to keep the win. It is what it is. But McLaren are going to say, well, we passed every test, so it's fine. And it's not like they've done a TD. McLaren have basically said, okay, we offered to change it. We asked the FIA to change it. They accepted. But also for McLaren, the positive is that they will now expect from the FIA some degree of, something in return for this. Like if McLaren say, hey, we want you to investigate this, they will expect the FIA to be nice and, cordial on that, given that, McLaren have, well, at least they would argue, they've complied with the investigation or whatever. And the other benefit for McLaren is that there's arguably only one more circuit they would have used this at anyway, maybe 0, because it was on their lower downforce rear wing spec. It's not a rear wing they're going to use in Singapore. It's not a rear wing they're going to use likely in Austin or in Interlagos or in Qatar or in Abu Dhabi or maybe Mexico, but unlikely actually, of course, because it's a high downforce circuit, high speeds, but high downforce because it's very high up in the clouds. So they have very thin air, basically. The only track that is considered might be Las Vegas, right, to use the rear wing there. But it's unlikely they would have used it again really anyway. So McLaren are like, yeah, fine, you got us, but we took the points, right? And that's what McLaren basically say. While our Baku rear wing complies with the regulations and passes all the FIA deflection tests, which is true. Well, okay, the comply with the regulations is actually an interesting point, just because as the article went on to say in the replies, that there is part of the rule that declares that the gap between the main blade and the flap, the slot gap, must be the same size at all times when the DRS is closed, which is clearly not the case when the edges flex up. So technically it did break the rules, but it's just in the way that the rules are measured and defined, it was fine. So, it's a classic Formula 1 grey area, isn't it? Where you literally read the rules and it says, well, this isn't allowed, but when you go to test it to see if it's not allowed, it's fine. They say that McLaren have proactively offered to make some minor adjustments to the wing following our conversations. We would also expect the FIA to have similar conversations with other teams in relation to the compliance of their rear wings. So, it's very interesting, the politics of all this, but Red Bull, they win this round, and as Marco says, 3 times we protested against McLaren's rear wing. Today, the FIA made a very correct decision. McLaren's rear wing is not allowed. Now it's time to look at their front wing. So, McLaren, obviously there are many elements of their car and their floor and their suspension and their front wing and other elements that have given them such a sizable advantage over Red Bull, it seems, in terms of recent performance over the last couple of rounds. And it's not like all of that comes down to the rear wing alone, but Red Bull are like, well, we're losing to these guys. We have to try and make their car be declared illegal effectively. And we'll get back to this more in a second, because it's quite clear that, sure, McLaren take off the rear wing. That doesn't mean Red Bull are right back there in terms of being the fastest car again, and they have struggled big time today, as have, to be fair, other teams as well. This is Max Verstappen going wide. Obviously, the evening session is nicely at night under the lights, but yeah, he was going wide, struggling with some lockups. Even right at the start of the first free practice session, both Perez and Verstappen had pretty decent lockups. Hamilton was having a nightmare as well. I mean, honestly, I think he'll be pretty buzzing about his decision right now. Obviously, he's frustrated that Mercedes have, it seems again, lost their way with this car. They're still on like that old floor spec that they used when they won Spa and Silverstone, but you know, their new upgrade didn't really work. They still seem to be struggling to understand exactly what to do to make the car turn into the corners. You know, Hamilton struggling massively with understeer, with oversteer. Russell was having a really hard time as well. The car's a mess, and the Ferrari is just, it seems right now, getting better and better. So I think Hamilton will be like, look, you know what, obviously it's frustrating to be where Lewis is, but he got his race wins this season, which, you know, will be pretty climatic end in some ways to his tenure at Mercedes. And, you know, to be fair, I think the car will probably be better. I mean, it should be around circuits like Austin, Interlagos, maybe more traditional tracks. I'd expect the Mercedes to be, you know, somewhat better than it has been, but obviously the Ferrari is getting better, the McLaren's getting better. You'd think the Red Bull would get better, but I'm not so convinced based on what we have seen over the last few rounds or so, and Hamilton will, I'm sure, be looking forward to his time in that Ferrari next season. This is a funny moment as well, Colapinto turning up to the Alpine pit crew, because I guess they looked kind of similar, and you see this guy kind of ushering him in, and the Alpine boy's like, what's this fella doing in our lane, effectively? Even Colapinto had a brief battle with Max actually around the track, and Max was laughing on the radio, being like, damn, this guy's racing me on my outlap. This is Russell in the wall towards the end of the session, breaks his front wing, just, you know, basically carried too much speed, the car couldn't handle it. He was locking up, and therefore he just had to effectively run it into the wall. There was no other way to do it apart from if he went in, well, sideways, and had broken the front suspension. So this was the best outcome. But it was two very familiar names at the top of the timesheet. It was Charles Leclerc and it was Lando Norris, right? And, you know, there was talk about the fact that those guys are just miles ahead of everyone, and that was certainly the case in the second free practice session. Interesting day on some ways for Oscar Piastri, of course, the winner last weekend. We talked about it quite a lot, right? How Piastri has that killer instinct. He has many features of a world championship caliber driver. But, you know, I am, of course, wanting to see more from him in terms of pure pace, qualifying performance, time management, stuff like this, because in the clean air, sure, he can manage his tyres okay. In the dirty air, that's when it can become more of a challenge. And today, Piastri had, you know, difficult day. FP1 wasn't ideal, FP2 wasn't ideal either, ends up, you know, several tenths off the pace of Lando Norris. So we'll see what that turns into on the Saturday and, of course, the Sunday. But look at this, half a tenth separating Norris and Leclerc, and then they were just miles ahead of the rest of the field. So, you know, the argument is right now that the Ferrari is looking like, as I told you guys a couple of days ago, probably the strongest car out there right now. It certainly looks it. And once again, Max Verstappen's hopes of holding on to this championship may in some parts be determined by Charles Leclerc. Red Bull's strategy right now genuinely seems to be Charles Leclerc and inshallah, right? Because, like, they've needed him over the last few rounds, and they're potentially going to need him again. Like, I think Max needs Leclerc to, like, keep winning races or taking points off Norris or whatever, because if Norris wins this weekend, where the Red Bull currently is, there's no guarantee that Max gets many points at all. And, you know, it's looking pretty good up front. Obviously, Charles Leclerc himself is not exactly mathematically out of the championship. He could still win it. It's possible. It's just exceedingly unlikely. If he somehow was to, he would be an incredibly deserving champion, and I genuinely wish that Leclerc was, you know, had a better few rounds. Silverstone, Canada, like those rounds, if they went better for him, then we could have genuinely had Leclerc in the title fight, which I really would have loved to see. But yeah, right now it's again the McLaren and the Ferrari that looks to be the strongest. And actually, in terms of the numbers, Leclerc is the fastest man in the long run data. So over a single lap and in the long run data, these were the types of numbers. And Leclerc was doing a 1:37.3 on the mediums, which is significantly faster than anybody else. 3 tenths faster than Piastri, half a second up on Hamilton and Russell, and even half a second up on his own teammate in Sainz. Verstappen and Perez are on the hards, but even then, you know, Verstappen could only manage a lap half a second down on what Leclerc was able to do, and Norris on the softs was able to do something relatively similar. So, and it's not like, I mean, we didn't even really talk about Red Bull here, but they were nowhere. Verstappen didn't have a good lap on the softs, Perez didn't have a good lap on the softs, so their pace, long run and short run, was nowhere compared to their rivals. And Yuki Tsunoda, again up here in P4, Ricciardo in P6, similar story to the first part of practice, right? So that could be very telling indeed, and serious changes necessary for Red Bull overnight if they want any chance here, because as it stands, you know, they're nowhere near the pace. Max was like, yeah, tricky session, not having the grip that we would like, because their car is not expected to work well here. They've got to work out how they get their car to ride over the bumps and the curbs, and that is seemingly a massive challenge for them. But it's not like they're even that close at the moment, right? And it actually turned out that in the long run data, the RB was basically faster. And Marco's like, I don't know how that's possible. After Baku, they didn't bring in a new part. We'll have to see how it goes. Yuki was incredibly fast on the hards. I have no explanation. Going on to say that we have to get things right so that we can be more competitive. I just looked and our pace was the same as Colapinto. Asked if Austin will be the next big step, he says it will have to. So yeah, I mean, I think Red Bull knew they were going to struggle here, but to struggle to this extent on the Friday, and as Marco's saying, I would say it's very worrying. We really have to try drastic things. Let's see what we can do. And he says, yeah, it's not engine mode the factor here, like we're just really slow. So sure, they can get McLaren's rear wing banned, but it's not going to make their car much more competitive. It wasn't just, of course, Verstappen struggling. Hamilton was like, yeah, the car's awful. At the moment, we're going to struggle to get into Q3. But before we close out, we're going to talk about the other big drama involving Max today, which was the swearing drama. So yesterday in the official press conference, he basically said the car was, well, you guys can work out what he said here. Now today, this is in kind of a follow-up to what Ben Sulayem said the other day about, well, you know, we're drivers, we're not rappers, right? And Hamilton was like, did you mean something like that? What are you trying to say, type thing? And fair enough. And it seems like they are going to follow in on some degree of enforcement here, because Max says this, and he's been summoned to the stewards, and now he has an obligation to accomplish some work of public interest. Basically, he's got some sort of community service to do. And like, are they trying to make Max retire? Is that the goal here? Like, what are the FIA doing? Genuinely, who cares? Why does it matter? And I actually, well, unfortunately, I can believe this, but it's just like, are we serious? So Max is out here like, what are we doing? I mean, this is Max's like standard face at the moment in the press conferences. He was asked to comment on it and he just said no words and walked away. He then said, it might be better not to say anything about it. I think it's all bizarre. He says he's going to have to attend something, some sort of like conference. I don't know. He says maybe I can go on the laptop rather than having to actually attend physically. It's highly confusing. And of course, Kevin Magnussen said, you know, I'm ready to F some whatever up, right? Because his penalty's now over. And Max then says that was because it wasn't in the press conference, which is apparently the difference. Here we can swear to the media. So basically, Max says, all right, I'm not going to say anything ever in these press conferences. I'll just tell the media, such as to Telegraph, what I want to say, and then that's fine, apparently. So it's an absolute mess, I'm not going to lie, but very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing on Max I thought was fascinating, really. Well, not exactly unexpected, but Bradley Lord, head of PR, communications, whatever, from Mercedes, he says, we are aiming to bring Max to Mercedes in 2026. That's no secret. Then he was asked, well, you know, you've got two drivers, you've got two seats. What's going to happen there? And he says they'll be focused, Antonelli and Russell, on making their mark next year. But if Max doesn't join, we are certainly keen to continue with the same lineup, right? So pretty much confirming that it is a straight shootout next year between Antonelli and Russell to determine who gets the drive if Max were to join. And, you know, my money would be on Antonelli to stay, I'll be perfectly honest. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.